Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night to you and all that kind of stuff. It's Thursday, it's 8 o'clock in the UK, 3 p.m. in the US. We're here on WBN 324. It's Paul English Live. And on tonight's show, it's no secret. Those of you that have been tuning in over the past few weeks, past couple of months, will know that I've dabbled in and out from show to show with regards to the French Revolution and droned on and on and on about the Napoleon film. Well, we're going to talk about the film, but a whole lot more as well. I'm joined by an ancient colleague of mine who I'll introduce shortly to you once we get up and running, and we're going to be going through things. We've got a little comical sort of coincidence that took place this week for both of us, obviously. That's why it's a coincidence. So yes, you're here listening to Paul English Live on WBN 324 and other stations. I'll mention them later on in the show. We're also on Free Fall Radio out of South Africa. And we're here for the next 2 hours through to 10 p.m. in the UK, 5 p.m. US Eastern Time. Anyway, I think it's time to throttle that down a bit now, don't you? Because, you know, really, in all honesty, that's not the sort of music they were listening to 200 years ago. And I thought we would try and get into the mood as best we could this evening with all sorts of things. Like I said there, just briefly in the introduction, ever since I started this thing, for some strange reason, actually it wasn't strange at all, I knew that the Sir Ridley Scott film of Napoleon was chugging along down the old lines and was due to arrive here. When was it now? It was Thanksgiving Day, actually, November the 23rd, 24th, so, you know, just a couple of weeks ago. And I'd not managed to get round to seeing the film, and somebody I know had not managed to get round to see it either, and I think I've been threatening or saying regularly here on the show that I'd get round to see it. Well, that kind of happened. And a good friend of mine, who I'm going to introduce right now, was also there. I'd like to welcome Scott of the Napoleonic. Mallificus, good evening. How are you? And welcome to the show.
Good evening. You know, sorry for all those listeners that was expecting Andy Hitchcock.
No one was expecting him. Who's he? I have no idea who are you talking about.
Well, it seems strange to be on air with you, actually, without having Andy here, has to be said.
Well, if he won't go and watch films, you know, actually, we've got to, I was thinking of notifying him. So, listeners, you might not know who we're talking about. It's terrible, isn't it, when hosts have little in-chats like this. But myself and Mallificus and a good colleague, a really good colleague, also an author called Andrew Carrington Hitchcock, have done a bucket load of shows together. There's always been sorts of little handover process, and then we've rowed publicly on air. We've never done that, actually, have we? It's always been incredibly civilised, hasn't it?
It is very, very British and civilised. I have rowed on air, but that was with an Aussie chap who obviously, you know, he's always up for a fight. So that's as those good salt of the earth Aussies are. But yeah. We've never come to harsh words, I believe. So.
Well, there's a first time yet. I mean, we've got 2 hours to go. They've got 2 hours. This could develop into an explosive sort of contretemps between the two of us, couldn't it, really? I don't think it will, of course. And I was thinking of notifying him and saying, could you get out and see the film? But this happened really quickly, didn't it? So let's get stuck into what was actually happening. What is it that was actually happening? You contacted me earlier in the week to brag about the fact that you were going to the pictures, as we call it over here in the UK. We sometimes call the movies the pictures. Isn't that right?
It is. Yeah, I did. I bragged saying, "Ha, I'm going to go and see Napoleon before you," essentially, while taking my father with me. Yeah.
Yeah, you actually went. When I went all Billy No Mates. Okay, so. But
if it hadn't been for my dad, I would have been Billy No Mates as well. There was only 7 other people in the cinema.
Actually, you know what? That's good. Okay, so you win on the low attendance thing. I counted in where I was. We had 35 in there. And I think that the screening for me started at 10 to 6, which of course is not a particularly top time of the week on a Wednesday, So there was that. But reading between the lines, Mallificus, Scott of the Napoleonic. It's much better than Scott of the Antarctic, I think, really, for this evening, don't you think?
Yeah, we'll roll with it. We'll
roll with it, won't we? I think your dad's responsible for all of this when you think about it. I mean, if you'd not invited your dad along, you would never have gone. You wouldn't have rolled off to the cinema all by yourself like sad old me, would you? Or would you?
No, probably not, I have to say. Particularly not on a... Well, the thing is, I normally work at my dad's place on a Wednesday day anyway, because the weather was rubbish, or was supposed to be rubbish. It actually turned out all right, so I got away scot-free with that one.
Right.
But I phoned him up and said, "Look, weather's going to be crap on Wednesday. Why don't I take you to see Napoleon instead?"
Yes.
And he was like, "Well, that's a good idea." So yeah, I bought a couple of tickets. One was considerably cheaper than my own because my father is 82 years of age,
right,
and is a historian as well. So it was no, I would not have trundled off on my own, particularly on a Wednesday afternoon. My showing was at 1 p.m, so hence the low attendance, middle of the week, lunchtime.
Right.
So I was surrounded. I think I was the only person in the cinema that paid full price for the ticket. I was surrounded by OAPs.
Really?
Yeah, and they all, for some reason, we were like the second lot in there, and all the other lots that arrived had this sort of herd mentality where they felt like they had to bunch close to us, so I couldn't swear or anything to my dad when things went wrong with the film.
Why do you often swear to your dad when things go wrong with films?
Me and my dad have pretty foul mouths when it comes to just.
Well, I'm
being
shocked, really.
Honest and blunt with each other.
I mean, I didn't bring you on here tonight, Mallificus, to lower the tone of the show. This has got off to a sticky start, hasn't it? Really, I mean, it's just. But you know what? I am very jealous. My teasing aside, I think it must be wonderful to go to the cinema with your dad. I can't remember the last time I was. When I went to the cinema with my dad, it was probably about 1975 or something. So that's a long time.
It's the first time I've ever been to the cinema with my dad. Ever.
Really?
Ever. Yeah, because he was always... we were a very traditional family, and I know my mum worked a bit when I was a kid, but my dad was rarely at home. He was always working. So, and I'm not a big cinema goer anyway. I haven't been to the cinema, I think, since the first Lord of the Rings film came out, and I can't remember when that was. It was that long ago. But it was a considerable few years ago. So I don't do fiction. I don't have a TV at home. Well, we have a TV, but I don't utilize it. We don't have a license, so we don't have terrestrial TV or anything like that. Yes, folks, over in the States, we have to have a license to be indoctrinated over here in the UK.
Well, we do quite like it, though, don't we? We like to pay for our indoctrination. At least we feel as though we're getting our money, don't we? Our money's
it's the done thing, isn't it, old boy? It is the done thing.
It really is. It really is. So, I mean, obviously we talked very briefly yesterday, and this is not really about cinema-going habits, but I think it's worth mentioning. You said that is a long time. Okay, so you win on that one as well, because the last time I went to the cinema was 2014, I think, or 13, so nearly 10 or 11 years ago, something like that. Interestingly, ironically, wonderfully and marvellously, at the very same cinema that I went to yesterday, which happens to be the oldest cinema in England. Now, people are eagerly going off to check where it is and going, I know where he lives, and all that kind of stuff. But it's a beautiful cinema, and built in 1911 and still fitted out in that way. And I get carried away just by being in the buildings. As you know, people that listen in here will know that I drone on a bit about architecture and things like this. So it was lovely to be there, and in this Nice place. I picked exactly the right seat. There is a right seat, of course, in the cinema. I got it. It's G12. I'm just letting you know. Row G, seat 12, slap bang in the middle, literally looking right in the centre of the screen. And away we went, really. And I did buy a bag of toffees or something like that. I can't remember what it was. So it turns you into a big kid, doesn't it? Going back to the cinema. Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of saw myself there. Here I am, in my early 60s, as it were. I don't look that old, but it doesn't matter really what you say about yourself. You start whittering on about it. And I'm going out to the cinema, all Billy no mates. I'm thinking, oh, you sad bugger. It's really bad. I couldn't actually bring anybody because I actually have a situation at home, where I have to leave someone at home looking after my wife and things like this. So I don't take my wife to the cinema at the moment. And not that she would necessarily, although she would have probably loved the love story side of it. Anyway, so there we were. We both went and saw it yesterday. We both didn't decide to talk anything about it. And now we're going to talk about the film. We're going to talk about some of the history and the run-up to the events in the film. And some of the things I suggest we're going to talk about that were not in the film, which is a lot. And there's a lot that's not in the film. And really, I suppose I was thinking that's not too surprising. In fact, that didn't surprise me at all. Because if you've got even a rudimentary understanding of the life of this man, particularly his public life, which is from about 1791 to 1821, a sort of 30-year, just a 25 to 30-year period, the amount of larks he got up to, the things he got up to and did with his life, you can't really say it's a life not half-lived, can you? It was a life lived to the absolute full, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, to be fair, I think you're right. I mean, the film's roughly 3 hours, something like that, isn't it? 2.5, 3 hours, something like that. Mm-hmm. And if you had done a trilogy, like a Lord of the Rings style trilogy, 3 hours per film, you still wouldn't have covered the ground. So I'm amazed, in actual fact, anyone that goes to watch the film, and I'm not suggesting anyone shouldn't watch the film, but anyone that goes to watch the film, please be sure that you've got some sort of understanding of who Napoleon was and what he achieved and what he did, because none of that's in the film, really.
No,
very
it's not.
Little. It's mainly about him as a person.
Yes, it is.
More than the actual escapades and the quote-unquote Napoleonic era. There's none of the Napoleonic era in the film other than a bunch of silly hats and some guillotines, I would say.
They are nice hats, though, aren't they? We don't wear hats like that anymore. I wouldn't mind seeing them come back. I mean, poor old milliners, they've been thrashed over the last 100 years, really. But, I think that was really it. I went in expecting cinema because I assume that's what I'm going to get. I'm not expecting a historically accurate thing. And I didn't look at any reviews before going to see it because I can't be bothered. For all sorts of reasons. It doesn't make any sense, actually, reading other people's reviews and views of this, that, and the other. You're just going to make up your own mind. And I've got a reasonable idea now of what they're likely to be saying about it. I mean, I was glad of it because, for all sorts of reasons, I think one of the main ones is that it provoked me 3 months ago to jump into looking at the French Revolution properly, which I'm still looking at, by the way. Obviously, there's a lot to look at. And the reason for looking at that was not to become a history buff and go, oh, isn't this interesting? And can't I tell you some interesting facts that you didn't know? Although that is useful. But was to really sort of flesh out that point on the chain, on the line, as it were, the way I view it anyway, which I sort of tend to draw in modern times from sort of like Henry VIII and Elizabeth I right through to the present day, that the machinations that we're facing right now, and they've always been with us for thousands of years, but really in their sort of modern form, run along that line. And this event, the French Revolution and Napoleon, arising phoenix-like from it, although that's not really a good analogy, I don't think. I think his life would have been extraordinary with or without it, but obviously not as extraordinary because of the energetic background from which he sprang this ruination of France in the early 1790s. Well, the whole of the 1790s was basically, one mess after another. So, yeah. And I should imagine that people don't have much of a knowledge of it, will be at a severe disadvantage because otherwise you're really just going to see a series of set scenes. I mean, I was filling in all the missed scenes along the way. Maybe you were too, from what you know. And then you realise, oh, there's a lot here. And as I'm watching it, I'm thinking, it's not long enough, this film. And that was the first thing I said to the usherette when I came out. I bored them. I said, do you know I haven't been to the cinema for 12 years? I went, yeah, or something like that. I said, do you know, I'm like sort of whistling I'm really hamming it up. I said, oh, yes, it's interesting. And I came here. Isn't that marvellous? Like some old fogey. It was really good.
I came here when it was first built, don't you know?
Yes, it was first built. Me and my family have been coming here since 1911, you know. My grandfather built this. Did he? No, not really. I mean, there was just on the thing about the cinema as well. It is very old, and of course, and they've retained much of the original architecture in there. Don't worry, listeners, we'll get away from architecture in a minute, but I want to just cover this bit. And so from the street, you look through this sort of arcade, which is really good, and right at the end of this arcade, which is about 20 feet long, so you come off the street through a sort of half street, half cinema place, and then into the cinema itself, there's an old wooden ticket booth. It's marvellous. Really, it is. Absolutely marvellous. Now, when I went there 11 or 12 years ago, we got our tickets from where would you get them from? That's where you think you're going to get them from. So I roll up expecting to see the ticket booth lady. I'm not being sexist. It was always a lady when I went. It could have been a bloke, but I'm expecting the ticket booth lady, a bit like Margaret Rutherford, who was issuing tickets in that British black and white movie about those. Anyway, I'm whistling on again. So I'm expecting to see Margaret Rutherford. And if you don't know who Margaret Rutherford is, probably for the best at the moment. Wonderful actress, though. And so there's no one there. Absolutely no one there. And I said, this is a bit disappointing. I said, I can't buy a ticket. He said, oh, no, you can go through there and buy a ticket with the sweeties or the confectionery or whatever. So you go and buy a digital ticket and they scan it. But the old ticket booth, Mallificus, was just fabulous because it was the old, like, bus tickets, cinema tickets, and you get them out and then a bloke could clip it and there'd be all those clipping droppings all over the place, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought, I really am becoming permanently nostalgized or something. I'm going to get...
I think it was a step backwards for them to give you a ticket or sell you a ticket and you get to the door and they tear the ticket in half. I think, I've just paid for that.
What have you ruined it for? You bloody ruined that, absolutely. So, let's have a look at a little bit at this film and see what it's about. So I think you are absolutely right in your assessment that it's really about his life. And of course, the other thing I would say on a negative criticism is that although the relationship between him and Josephine is to some degree romantically misrepresented, it's actually made to be slightly more than it was, in my view. And also it occupies too much time in the whole of the running time. Although I know...
Absolutely.
It doesn't it? Yeah. And I was expecting that because I'd heard interviews with Scott talking about it. And in fact, this extended version that they're planning to release on TV, which is going to be 4 hours, and the director's cut, they've said is even more of that. I'm going, no, I want a lot less of that. I need it balancing out. It's not sort of like a soap opera. And... I don't know if you know, the real relationship between them was really all one-way traffic, in truth, although she came to actually become in love with him after several years. But at the beginning, he was like a hobby to her. He wrote letters to her every day of his life. Every day. And I think on average, throughout his entire life, another thing not really covered within the film or even suggested was the volume of letters he wrote. I think it's about 15 letters per day, every day of his life, not just to her. Oh, I love you at 10 o'clock in the morning. I just had to send you another letter telling you that I still love you. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That would drive anybody bug batty crazy. But no, he was a prolific is not the word for it, is it? This is almost, Charles Dickens levels of ink. He must have gone through gallons. They must have had a special horse with him that just carried the ink and the paper so that he could fire these things off when they're on these campaigns. I think about terribly tedious, minute things like that. But yes, so you thought, I guess you thought that the romance bit was a bit too top heavy in the time department. There was just too much time spent on it.
Absolutely. It's not one of those. It's not one of those epic movies that a school would pay for tickets for the class to go and see, because really there's very little educational value in the entire film, I would say.
Yes.
There are all right. You've got the beginning with the Battle of Toulouse. When they storm the fort and then take on the British fleet from the fort and everything. That was fantastic. Really brilliantly done.
And it's a shock at the beginning, isn't it? That first, the death of that animal and things like that. That really gets. It's like, because I thought, yes, that's what I'm expecting to see. That's what it would have been like. It would have been like that. That's what it was like. Yeah, really bad.
Warfare back in those days. I mean, and we're only talking a couple of 100 years ago, realistically. Warfare back in those days was, it's horrific as it is now, but it's far more clinical now than it was back in those days. There was blood and guts everywhere in those days. But no, I mean, the film itself, unless you're aware of, because there's none of you. He becomes emperor, and then there's none of what occurred across Europe. None of it. The battles with Spain.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's absolutely none of it.
I know what you mean, mate. Where's Spain? I'm going. What happened to Spain and Portugal?
Where the bloody did Spain go?
Absolutely right. Yeah. And then as I'm having this criticism scarper through my head, I'm going, he couldn't possibly fit it in. I mean, I think what he's done is brilliant. Really, I do. I know it's got loads of shortcomings. I know the French are sick as parrots about it. I don't blame them. I can understand that too. Everybody's right with their opinions. But when I came out and talked to the guy and he was boring him to death about, I used to be here as a young and all that nonsense, I said to him, you know what the problem? I said, that was good, but there's a problem with it. He said, what's that? I said, it needs to be about 4 or 5 times longer. I said, actually, that wouldn't be long enough either. And really, I suppose, not that I'm in charge or I've got the money or whatever, and it probably isn't a project that Scott himself would be interested in. But, they now make these TV series, don't they, at a high production level, almost movie production level. And seriously, it's the sort of thing, if you're covering 30 years of this guy's life, right? Not a tobacconist in Totnes, right? Not that I've got anything against them, right? But, it's a generally repetitive sort of life. This guy's life is off the charts. It's one of the most astonishing lives that we know of. And you have to get that across. And you can't get it across in 2 hours and 47 minutes. It's not. You won't get it across in 4 hours either.
No.
And then you end up with lots of know-it-alls in the audience like you and me possibly going, this is where the bloody hell Spain,
where's Spain? Hang on a minute. He didn't leave Egypt for his missus.
No.
Nothing of the sort.
No, he didn't.
I mean, and if you want to get into sort of that kind of thing, I mean, another guy, I know we're concentrating on Napoleon, but another guy that really threw a spanner in the works for Napoleon and who also led an equally interesting life would have been Nelson, Admiral Nelson. Battle of Trafalgar, etc. But originally Nelson of the Nile. The reason Nelson, or shall I say the reason Napoleon left Egypt is because the British had just destroyed his fleet on the Nile and he was thinking, well, I better get out of here before before anything else happens. Whereas the film insinuates that it was because his missus was having an affair and he'd settle accounts later,
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was expecting all of this, so I didn't get disappointed or cross. I didn't go in thinking, I'm off to see a historically accurate, completely comprehensive timeline. I just knew I wasn't going to see that. But there were certain things that they did that were a bit silly. I mean, the battle in Egypt is nowhere near the pyramids. They could see them from a distance, There I am being nerdy. But I think these things are important. Because it's a bit like, let's tart the film up with these well-known landmarks. Well, you can do that. As you see, there's a brilliant bit about him that's not even covered. And this aspect of his character is not really addressed in the film at all. When they went to Egypt, he took 160 scientists with him. 160, right? These are the first scientists ever to be towed around at the back end of an army. Come on, we're off to Egypt. You lot, down there, the academy or whatever it was called, you're coming with me. Let's go and learn some stuff while we're out there. Seriously. And they laid the groundwork for archaeological digs. They were the first ones ever, So he's changed things in a way that you will not sense at all from the film. And that's because his life's too big. It's just everything. And so you can't cover it in that way. And the Egyptian thing was a bit irritating because obviously a key aspect of the discoveries there was the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. And then its
Yes.
its subsequent translation by Champollion, which has changed the world in terms of our understandings of scripture and of other ancient historic texts. What they did there, I mean, there was a British guy, by the way, that worked with Champollion, who was never mentioned, but was equally responsible for doing the work. And I haven't got his name to mind right now. But those guys, by taking that stone, which a French officer found it, said, "Oh, look what I found." Oh, that's interesting, René. Yeah, we better get that cleaned up, and that might come in useful, And I wish they'd touched a little bit on that. I mean, the little scene they had with him with the mummy was just a bit facile, to be quite honest. It was daft.
Yeah, but I did find it hilarious because he was on tiptoes at first, and then they put a box so he could actually stand up and be head high with the shrunken mummy. I thought that was hilarious.
Well, maybe that was a little in-joke. I mean, because historically, any old ex-British schoolboys out there, and maybe not even British ones, but certainly, we were all taught, I know my dad was taught, he's very short, He was a little, he's a little twerp. That was how Napoleon was talked about. But he wasn't. For his time, he was 5'7". For his time, he was of average height. I understand. The reason why he got that reputation is that his personal bodyguard, they were big lads. They were big. So they were all 6'6". That would be huge for those days. That really would be massive.
They still have the saying nowadays, don't they? Napoleon syndrome for little people with big attitudes.
I won't mind having it, man. I won't mind a bit of Napoleon syndrome. Seriously, there's something... I'm serious. Well, I must get some Napoleon tablets.
Mr. English, you really need to work on your Napoleon syndrome.
Maybe I do. Go down and see the trick cyclist to get my brain analysed. But maybe they'll start issuing Napoleon tablets, Mallificus, and we can get a bit of that attitude. Because on a positive side of it, as I'm watching all the battle scenes, I'm not on anybody's side except the side of all of the soldiers. This is all I'm seeing on all the sides. How absolutely astonishingly courageous they are. Really.
Oh man, you cannot put into words. I mean, there is nobody left like that in Britain, I would say, nowadays. Very few people have got the balls it would take to stand, with a platoon of musketeers forming a square when they're charged at cavalry, and then fanning out again into a long line to deal with the infantry that comes in afterwards, and then back into a square, and absolute carnage. I've sent you actually a little bit of footage. I don't know whether you want to play it, but it's of testimony from a guy who was at the Battle of Waterloo on the British side.
Right, where did you send that to me? Is that on Skype?
I sent it to you in Skype. It's about 3.5 minutes long, something like that. I've snipped it up, and I've just taken some of the best bits of what the chap had to say.
Okay.
But
all right, I can see that.
Idea.
Yeah, let me. We'll run that. I'll just give me a few minutes. I'll make sure all the switches are in the right place. Absolutely. Yeah. But it's very interesting. I stumbled across something about half an hour. I didn't have time before we went on air here, looking at that kind of stuff. And your observation about the resilience of the people of the time is true. And yet there are all sorts of factors. Here I am wriggling my way out of why I'm not that guy. But there are colossal factors. I mean, one of the things that occurs to me is that everything in the movie is the fastest thing in the movie is a horse, except when it's been blown up, right? And that does happen a lot because a lot of horses got blown up in this thing. And so everybody's walking or riding a horse. Most of them are walking all over the place, like huge distances, non-stop. I mean, and
France to Russia is no mean feat. Let's put it that way.
Oh, I don't. Well, you're not inviting me on a walk, are you, next week or something? I mean,
excuse the pun. No mean feat.
Yes, you're a bit too witty for me today. I'm not.
I thought you were quicker than that.
No, I'm very, very slow. I don't want to catch. I don't want to encourage you too much. It's all going to get slightly out of hand. But no, you're right. I mean, would we consider having a good old jaunt? Come on, we'd go for a walk down to Moscow. Fancy it? I mean, I don't know how long it is. Yeah, I'll give it a go.
Miles. Oh, because at one point in the film they said, "Oh, well, Moscow's only 200 miles away," and it's just like you've got to walk that. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing, because I've read a few bits and bobs on Napoleon, and there was one book that I mentioned to you before we came on air, which was anyone can get hold of it. I believe it's still on Amazon now. It's still in print, and it's called Voices from the Past, 1815 Waterloo, and one of the things that, and the book consists of newspaper clippings and literally diaries and testimonies written after the time that were all some guy who was trying to put a battle scene together for the British Museum. He'd been commissioned to put a battle scene together, for the British Museum in Wellington's time. They wanted it. So as a result, he put out adverts in newspapers to get eyewitness testimonies and this, that, and the other. And a lot of that still remains. And one of the things that astounded me, absolutely astounded me, really was the logistical nightmare of having to transport thousands of men across such vast distances.
Yep.
They didn't have we all know what problems the Third Reich had with supplying their troops, and they had aircrafts and things like that.
They did.
So back in those days, what a logistical nightmare it was just to transport ammunition, food. They would have to get food from the surrounding areas, which is obviously when they ran into trouble with when Napoleon was pursuing the Russians towards Moscow. They enforced a scorched earth policy, so it was very difficult for them to feed the troops and everything on the way. What a logistical nightmare in those days. I mean, even nowadays, that sheer volume of men.
Yeah.
But in
do you think
those
we're showing
days,
our age? I'm fascinated with the logistics. If you'd talked to me at 15, what are you talking about? But now I'm going, how did they actually even get to the battlefield? Why were they not tired when they got there? I'm thinking things like this. I mentioned sorry.
I was just going to say, a lot of the testimonies in that book, as I say, I can highly recommend that book. It's a brilliant book. A lot of the testimonies in that book talk about how they were starving on the way and they were taking whatever they could from villages that they were coming past. And this, the general populace did not fare well, from any army passing through, whether they were a friendly one or not. There was even talk at one point. Actually, it's a fascinating. I'll mention it now. I could leave it till later, but I'll mention it now because it's in that book. There's a fascinating account of a lot of looting taking place, and a group of guys thought they'd discovered a barrel of brandy, which they couldn't find a tap to smack into the barrel itself. So one guy used his pistol and shot a hole in it with 3 or 4 guys gathered round with their cantinas so as not to spill any. It turned out to be a barrel of flipping gunpowder. The whole lot went up.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. So, and this is all anecdotal stuff that was written at the time. So, I can't recommend that book enough. It's really well worth a read. I've lent my copy out and I haven't had it back. Otherwise, I'd be quoting from it right now.
It'll come back. The person's probably wriggling somewhere in the ethers thinking, I must send that book back to Mallificus. So. By the way, just as a shout-out, you're listening to Paul English Live here on WBN 324. I'm going to play this little thing and then we'll be back after this little blurb. Here we go. Oh, no, we're not going to do it because you know what I've done? I do this all the time. I lower the tone of things. I keep turning the volume down. Here we go. After this, take 2.
3, 4, radio. Stop them.
Attention all listeners. Are you seeking uninterrupted access to WBN 324 Talk Radio despite incoming censorship hurdles? Well, it's a breeze. Just grab and download Opera Browser, then type in WBN324.zil. And stay tuned for unfiltered discussions around the clock. That's WBN324.zil.
The views, opinions, and content of the show hosts and their guests appearing on the World Broadcasting Network are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of its owners, partners and other hosts or this network. Thank you for listening to WBN 324 Talk Radio.
Welcome back. The brief, short and sweet. You're listening to Paul English Live here every Thursday on WBN. And I'm joined here this evening by my guest tonight. No, my co-host is Mallificus Scott. Mallificus, welcome back after that wonderful interruption there. So we were talking about logistics. We're talking about the life of Napoleon. We're talking about the film at the moment. There's a lot more that we're going to touch upon, but we're talking about the film. One of the things that you were just mentioning there, logistically, we were talking about all this walking around. I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. One of the books I've got is In Russia with Napoleon by General Caulaincourt. He was in the film. You'll remember him in the film. Caulaincourt conducts a negotiation with Alexander I later on because Caulaincourt was sent and became very good friends with Alexander and was advising Napoleon all the time. Well, Caulaincourt went into Russia and came out with him alive, obviously, and wrote this stuff. And he was as prolific a writer as Napoleon. It's an astonishing book to read. It really is, because you feel, when you're in the dialogue scenes, as if you're actually sat with them in the office. It's a brilliant piece of writing. It really is. One of the points he made out, this is just on the logistic thing, before they'd even fought a battle, they have to, there's 640,000 of them, and they've got to get to Poland. Well, they go to Poland so fast, a lot of people get exhausted. Some die just from marching too quickly, and they lost 10,000 horses just getting to Poland. They hadn't fought anybody. And you think 10,000 horses. It's a lot. I don't know what the population levels of Europe were in the European countries, but obviously not as swollen and as engorged with all the people as it is right now. But, that's a serious bit of horsage to lose. Where would the horse-keeping society... They'd be rather furious. I mean, it's just 10,000 out for a gallop to Poland, obviously, and just wore them out. But and there's bits, anyway, Caulaincourt saying, you've got to stop, right? They're all going to break. You can't keep moving at this speed. Because, obviously, the fact is that he won practically every battle he fought. Borodino he classed it as a victory, but it wasn't really. It was a draw. I think the French losses were lower than the Russian losses, but it really just put an end to everything, did that battle. And his tactics, if you're into all that kind of thing, were based on speed. Absolute massive speed in comparison to the way the other armies moved. That was one of the fundamentals. And all these mini corps systems, he had all these little mini armies all zooming around at speed, able to trap these more larger and unwieldy forces which couldn't move or react as quickly. So in simple terms, I'm not a military tactician. I don't intend to become one, and probably a military tactician's just listened to me and said thank God for that. But but that's definitely part of it. Also, let's talk about Austerlitz. Now, listeners, if you're not familiar, Austerlitz, the Battle of Austerlitz, is reckoned to be his sort of masterpiece of military command and tactical execution and overwhelming victory, everything. And in fact, I think the bit in the film where he said to Alexander afterwards, "Oh, that guy, the Austrian guy, you need to thank me because I could have completely wiped you out today." This is true. That's absolutely true. He could have done that. And yet the actual battle sequence for Austerlitz, impressive though it is as far from the truth as it could be.
It's an absolute load of waffle. I couldn't. My dad looked at me and said, my dad looked at me and said,
"What is this?
I don't remember anything about being a frozen lake at Austerlitz."
No, there wasn't. There was an escape route for certain divisions, I think. On the southern part of the battlefield, just geographically, for one, let's not get into all this too much, but there was a lot of them got trapped there, and they had to escape. So the French were basically driving them south or southeast, and there was a river, and some of them drowned in the river. Now, they exaggerated the numbers because, obviously, propaganda was in full flow then as well. It took mainly the form of these wonderful paintings of Napoleon looking amazing, going across the Alps on a horse, whereas in fact he actually went across it on a donkey, which is not as glorious looking, and you wouldn't have that wonderful painting which today's image is taken from. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. But the propaganda was that hundreds of them died and blah blah blah. Well, it was about three. 3 guys died in this lake that broke through, or they got carried away by the water. But nevertheless, and maybe you see in film, how do you actually detail the tactical maneuvering? It's way too complex. I don't know how you would even be able to communicate that in film without a narrator. I mean, I just don't say. You'd be looking at things moving around and you wouldn't be able to work out, why are they doing that? Why is he going down there like this? It's really in retrospect that you see these sorts of things. But, so anyway, said, it's a very impressive scene, but it's just not true, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing is, as I said to my dad afterwards, it's such a sweeping generalized sort of synopsis of his life, with lots of unnecessary sort of slow-mo, long-winded Lord of the Rings type scenes that, I mean, Lord of the Rings, they could have put all 3 films in one film if they'd have just done without the slow-mo nonsense. And I think really pretty much because addressing everything that Napoleon did, as you say, you could not fit into a 2-hour, let's call it a 3-hour film. You could not fit that into a 3-hour film.
No.
So which bits do you pick? I guess you just pick him as the person and the things that he felt passionate about. And I suppose if you're going to make a Hollywood movie, then the main thing you're going to be passionate about is a love interest and having an heir, etc., etc., which is largely what the film is about. One of the things that, obviously, when he was asked to step down the first time, and they gave him full sovereignty of the island of Elbe,
yes,
which he embraced. He took it all in his stride and worked wonders with Elbe. But it was down to a politician from France visiting him and saying, you ought to come back, monsieur. It's ripe for you coming back, and not forgetting, and this features very heavily in the film as well, the impact of the press.
Yes.
The impact of the press in the film shows how that the press were ridiculing Napoleon. But you also have to concede the fact of, I'm sure we'll get into parts of the French Revolution and stuff at some point throughout this, but you also have to concede the fact that how was public opinion swayed in France if there weren't any such things as newspapers? Back in the day, it would have been the peasants talking amongst themselves. So, his return to power, I think, for me, rings some alarm bells and some string pulling.
I think there's a lot going on. Yeah, I mean, when he went to, is it Egypt? It may have been. He set up a newspaper, He used to set up newspapers. That's not covered.
Well, that rings alarm bells as well.
Yeah, and he would set them up to communicate back to people all over the place. The whole of the Egyptian campaign is really interesting because he presented himself as a friend of them, and this worked really, really well. I mean, there is...
Well, he took a leaf out of St. Francis Drake's book then, obviously, because that's, obviously the only person that St. Francis Drake had an issue with was the Spanish.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose standing back, the bit, even the bit, you see the problem, well, not the problem, but I understand why the beginning with Marie Antoinette was the way it was. But the script, the actual on-screen text was inaccurate. As I've been droning on about here, the French Revolution is not a French Revolution. It's not. And Marie Antoinette was not despised until the machinations of the intriguers had worked their hellish magic, as it were, upon the crowd to such a degree that it came to that. But that wasn't how she was perceived at all. Nor the king. The king, Louis XVI, his great downfall is his great strength, but it's also his downfall was that he loved and absolutely trusted the people of France with his own life, and you can see what happened to it. But there's an attack. Part of the French Revolution is where there's an attack on I think it's pronounced the Tuileries. It's an old palace. I don't know whether it still exists, actually. It may well do, so I'm showing my ignorance there. But it was the residence in Paris of the king, and they attack it. And I was just reading this only the other day. I read it before I went to see the film, actually, just to get another sense of it. And Napoleon has come into the script. This is in Nestor Webster's book, talking about the crowd that marched on it. And there's 20,000, it's 30,000. And Napoleon was there, said, no, it's about 5,000. I'm going to go with him, right? I really am. And because his exaggeration was key. They were trying to project the idea into the minds of all the Parisians that you're all rebelling, aren't you? And you all hate this guy, and none of them did. And you see, this would make for a magical. You need a film really just about the French Revolution, but told from the perspectives that Webster supplies, for example. And she's not alone. And what she said, there's a scene where, and the courage of these people is just all of them that are defending the king. You just go, wow, top bloke. the king's done nothing except help the country, but in their minds, because they've been lied to viciously for 3-4 years, the rebel rousers are always saying that he has. We've got to kill him, right? I mean, to call it an injustice is not even touching it, really. It's hellish. It's completely wrong. Anyway, they march and they confront and find the king before them, this huge mob. And they all just, in Webster's account, they just stop. They're gobsmacked. They don't know what to do. He's just smiling at them. It's totally disarming. They don't know what to do at all. They just look at him and go, "Oh, you're great." Literally, that's kind of what's going on in the crowd. They're going, "This guy's all right." And somebody says, "He's not bad." I mean, literally, that's what happened. They were going to kill him and rip him apart. I mean, they do in the end, of course. I'm sorry if I've ruined it, for everybody, but I think you all probably know that anyway. And then for 3 or 4 hours, this mob that's going in and out of its mood is haranguing him and the people around him, protecting him. He's sat on a windowsill, Louis XVI, just saying the French people will never hurt me. And in the end, they go away on this particular event. And it's the same. There was a previous scene I'd mentioned here a few weeks ago with Marie Antoinette, where they're out at Versailles. This was prior to this, maybe a couple of years prior to this event, because it's a whole series of revolutionary ebbs and flows before they finally crack it, and this alien force, which is really what it is, destroys the French monarchy. And there's a bit there where they were chasing her and her children through the palaces, and she finally comes out onto this balcony about 5 o'clock in the morning in the moonlight, and the whole of the crowd just went silent. They didn't know what to do. She was beautiful, apparently. She never said any of those things about cake. This is just all completely made up crap. And you get like everything, as you well know, Mallificus, the front-end publicity for events, this is happening right now today, is not hardly ever what has actually really taken place. Everything is used for manipulation purposes, very effectively, I have to say, and tragically for us. But that was the case there. And there's Mike King, the guy that has the website Tomato Bubble. Actually, he did. I think that went down the drain, didn't it? And unfortunately, I don't know the name of his new site, so my apologies, Mike, if you're listening or catch this or whatever. But he wrote some stuff. He wrote a very good booklet on Napoleon, which is very much worth reading, I would suggest. And he's touching upon that entire period prior to the French Revolution, which is a backdrop, really, to the arrival of Napoleon. And you would be familiar with this as well. Obviously, in 1776, it's quite a year, because in America, you have the United States get rid of George III, is it, or second, or whichever one it was. They win their War of Independence, supposedly. According to Cornwallis, they were never going to win it. And subsequent events are probably proving that because of the manic tentacles of the banking system. But you've got that going on over there, and in Europe you've got the arrival of the Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt, the ex-Jesuit but Jewish priest, beginning the Illuminati. That's in 1776. So that's 12 or 14 years before all this nonsense. And their hand is in it. This is, Illuminism was apparently disbanded. And it isn't, because all of the tactics, all of the destructive force of the so-called French Revolution is really the tactics of Illuminism done through the Jacobin Club in France. I mean, there were hundreds of Jacobin clubs. They had the main one in Paris, but hundreds of them, and they're basically the beginning of wokeism, as it were, globalism, world revolutionary movement. That's where you see it. And they got hold of the French people, just like they got hold of the Russian people a couple of hundred years later, and wrecked the place, wrecked it.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. Well, they've done the same all over the world. I mean, going back to my granddad's book, he talks about what was in the protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, and it gives a timeline. Yeah. Starting in 429 BC.
Yeah.
So 429 BC in Greece, we're at the time of Pericles, the snakes started eating into the power of that country. Second
Yes.
stage, about 69 BC, in Rome in the time of Augustus. Third stage, AD 1552 in Madrid, the Inquisition. Fourth stage, about 1790 in Paris, the French Revolution. So, I can read out the rest. It goes up to the ninth stage. If you want me to list them now, I may as well. Fifth stage in London from 1814 onwards. Sixth stage in Berlin from 1871 onwards, the Prussian menace.
Yeah.
Seventh stage in St. Petersburg, over which is drawn the head of the snake, under the date 1881. He's referring to a map that came with the Learned Elders, Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion.
Okay.
Eighth stage in 1905 from Russia onwards up to 1917,
Yes.
the Russian Revolution, or the anti-Russian Revolution. And it says here, all the states which the snake has traversed have had the foundations of their constitutions shaken. Arrows indicate the head of the snake moving on to Moscow, Kiev, and Odessa. It is well known to what extent the latter cities are centres of militant Jewry, it says here. And then it says ninth stage, Constantinople to Jerusalem, i.e. Palestine. So, and I'm reading a book at the moment which I'll just touch on it briefly, about Gallipoli, and the guy that wrote the book, he was there in 1915. Anyone can find the book. It's by a guy called Arthur Beecroft, and it's just simply called Gallipoli. It's a fantastic read, and in it he comments about how he remembers his granddad talking, because throughout the book he's talking to his son, because he wants his son to know why he went to Gallipoli and blah, and why they signed up, and what occurred. And he points out to his son in the book that 100 years before, Arthur Beecroft's grandfather, he remembers his grandfather talking about the glory days of the Napoleonic Wars, and how 100 years before they'd been protecting the same patch of land with the Turks from the French. And now 100 years later, there's Arthur Beecroft attacking that patch of land with the French against the Turks. Oh, how the wheel turns, Mr. English.
Yeah, it does. It's that agitating force, I know it's glib to say divide and conquer, but that's, in simple essence, that's what it is. And it's people can be manipulated into positions purely because of, economic threats, I mean, that was a thing that's obviously missing from the film. By the way, just a quick shout out to Sussex Man. I was stumbling there a few minutes ago referencing Mike King and his old site, Tomato Bubble. Thank you, Sussex Man. His actual new channel is Real History Channel, and it's worth going over to. And Mike, I spoke to 4 or 5 years ago, and he was kind enough to send me an awful lot of his PDF books at the time. The one on Napoleon is excellent because he has this great ability, does Mike, of synthesizing things down to a very fast read, and I think that that's useful. Then if your appetite is massively whetted and you want to really plough into the detail, then there are obviously a whole range of books on Napoleon. 175,000, Mallificus. More books written on him than practically anybody. I learnt that from Jeremy Irons the other day by watching a documentary on Napoleon, but about 2018, about his use of art as propaganda. This guy is competent beyond belief. I mean, he's like, he operates on every single level of understanding what he's up to. And the other parallel I would suggest, although I need to keep talking about this, it's not a straight up parallel, but there is a lot of commonality with regards to the flow of his life and the flow of Adolf Hitler's. In that, although this is not, of course, we wouldn't ever be sold that idea here in the UK, heaven forbid, but when you look at what he was doing, and in his own mind, Napoleon was fighting a series of defensive wars against multiple alliances his entire life, basically. So, even before he was emperor, right through to 1815 and the Waterloo scenario, all the time, from when he's brought in, the siege at Toulon, as you were mentioning earlier, and all, that's his life. He's at war. The other thing that's astonishing about him, another key part, is he's out there fighting with his men all the time.
Yes.
He's out there on the horse doing it. He had bad piles, apparently, so you wouldn't wish that on anybody. Although I should imagine it was probably quite common, all that sitting in that saddle for weeks. Good grief. So but he was out there, so he was made of extremely tough stuff. And I think, Corsica is where he came from an Italian family. This is not mentioned too much, but it is. He's of Italian descent, raised in Corsica, which had been taken over by the French. His father had allied with the French. He was very pleased to do that. It wasn't sort of too hostile or horrible, I don't think. There may have been I think there was a bit of scrappage before that. And I love the way the Italians say his name. It's Napoleone, which is, I quite like that. I just do.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think it's got a ring to it. Napoleone. So it's interesting.
I mean, the British did refer to him as a Corsican thug.
Well, they would have to, wouldn't they? As opposed to a British thug. As opposed to a City of Bank of London thug. The worst thugs of them all, right? So they would have to refer to that, So I would have gladly had him march in here as long as he would have strung those bastards up. I'm serious. I mean, that's really what's needed.
But then, all wars are bankers' wars, and Napoleon required funding as well. Let's not go too far into that, maybe, but I believe it was the same family line that was funding both sides, wasn't it?
No, you're making this up. No, it would never be like that. You have a good bank and a bad bank, and they all hate one another. Because I saw it in a movie once, Mallificus, so it must be true, right?
Yeah, right.
There were so many scenes that, I'm sat here thinking of just bucket loads of things that could be in that movie. I actually thought the only bit that I wasn't happy about, the bit I was wanting to see, was the retreat from Moscow where they have to cross the Berezina River, which is just... if you read the account of that, you can't believe that they did it. It's one of these things you go, what? I may have mentioned it in passing briefly here, and I'm only going to mention it briefly again, but on their retreat from Moscow, so they've been depleted from 640,000. Now, by this stage, they're down to about 80,000. And they're trapped on this river, the Berezina River. And Marshal Ney turns to one of his other generals or whatever and says, if he gets us out of this, he surely is the devil. And he gets them out of it. So I don't know if he really was the devil, but they have to cross this water, in freezing water. I mean, I don't know what it was. And the men were allowed to go into the water for 15 minutes to build this pontoon over about 800 yards to get everybody off. They built one 12 foot wide, 800 yards long, or 400 yards long, something like that, in about 8 hours. Carpenters swimming in this river, being pulled out. Some of them died from hypothermia, not because they stayed in too long, but 15 minutes was too long for some of them, and they got away. So, we were talking about the resilience, the physical resilience and endurance, not just of them, but of the Russians, of all these people at this time of life on the planet in Europe. It is off the charts compared to where we're at right now. And I guess maybe because all of them were living outdoor lives, the huge bulk of people would have been working on farms, dealing with horses all the time. They would have had calloused hands, strong feet and legs because they lived on them, and that was the way it was. So it's still, though, astonishing to look at this and to see these things. And of course, there's a bit of me, while I don't know about you, but whilst I'm watching these battle scenes, I couldn't help but I'm sort of tearing up inside. I know you all think I'm probably wet, but I do, because I'm just looking at this sort of, there's a bit after a while of seeing these battles, you go, this is just mad. You just realise it's completely mad. Although maybe, I've heard some of the reports from the British troops at the time, they just couldn't wait to get out there. They think it's great. And I remember, maybe I'd have been like that. Maybe you would have. You go, bloody hell, getting off this farm at least. I don't care if I die. At least I get to go and kill some. Maybe that's how we all thought back then. It was dreadful. But
it was more about, looking after the brotherhood. It was looking after your brotherhood of man, looking after, it's like Arthur Beecroft said back in 1915. He said, if I hadn't have signed up, well, I would have just been a rotter. I'm not part of the team. I'm not playing the game.
Yes.
Because there was that sort of camaraderie back then, back in 1915. You look now, 2015, most people would be like, well, you can sign up, mate, but I'm going to stay here. I'm all right, Jack, and that's very much the attitude nowadays.
Yes.
It was, like I say, it was just wasn't the done thing. And not forgetting as well that certainly with the British Navy, I know that anyone that participated in battle was entitled to a share of the spoils. So certainly
Yeah.
that was the case with the British Navy in Nelson's time, which would have been, Napoleon's time as well. So I don't know whether the same things were afforded for the army as well, but as I say, at some point, if you get around to playing that little clip of just the guy's testimony of what it was actually like to be in battle,
I will. We'll do
just
that.
gives you a very, very brief,
Yes.
barely eye-opening account. But you've got to.
I'll bring that up. I'll tell you what, we're at the top of the end of the first hour here, and I'm going to play. I just realised that I needed to play a specific piece of music, which practically everybody will know. It's by Tchaikovsky, and it's the 1812 Overture. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's 16 minutes long. Now, why am I playing it? Because the battle around which the theme is inspired by, I can't really phrase it. I've not looked it up too much, but it's Borodino, this great battle in Russia after they've been drawn into Russia several hundred miles and still a couple of hundred miles from Moscow. They have this big, I think it was probably the biggest sort of on-scale battle of the lot. Anyway, here's the last, you'll all know this, but it seemed appropriate. I'll probably never ever get an appropriate chance to play it again, so we're going to play this. This is the last 4 minutes or so of the song, and we'll be back with you after this. You're listening to Paul English Live here on WBN 324. Now, here's a bit of Tchaikovsky for you.
At the commencement, the commanding officer was killed by a musket shot, but his place was soon filled up. And even this much had unfortunately so frightened one of the young recruits of my company, named Bartram, who had never before been in action and now did not like the curious evolutions of the shell so close to him, that he called out to me and said he must fall out of rank as he had taken very ill. I could easily see the cause of the illness, so I pushed him into rank again, saying, "Why, Bartram, it's the smell of this little powder that's caused your illness. There's nothing else the matter with you." But that physic would not content him at all, and he fell down and would not proceed another inch. I was fearfully put out at this, but was obliged to leave him, for if he had had his due, he would have been shot. About 10 o'clock the action of the day began at Hougoumont on our right, and from there it fell on our centre, where we were attacked by a tremendous body of cavalry and infantry. The fire, however, which had been kept up for hours from the enemy's cannon, had now abated in that quarter, owing to the close unison of the two armies. And from this time onward we endured some heavy work throughout the day, having constantly to be first forming square to receive the repeated attacks of their cavalry, and then line to meet their infantry, charge after charge being made upon us, but with very little success. On the left, on the turnpike road, was placed a brigade of German cavalry with light horses and men. When Bonaparte's bodyguards came up, they charged these, making fearful havoc amongst their number. Still nothing daunted, they formed again, and this time ascended at us. But of the two, they met with a worse reception than before, for we instantly threw ourselves into 3 squares with our artillery in the centre, and the word having been given not to fire at the men who wore armour, but at the horses, which was obeyed to the very letter. So, as soon as they arrived at close quarters, we opened a deadly fire, and very few of them wholly escaped. It was a most laughable sight to see these guards in their chimney armour trying to run away after their horses had been shot from under them. I think this quite settled Bonaparte's bodyguards, for we saw no more of them, they not having expected this signal defeat. That affair, however, had only passed off a very few minutes before their infantry advanced, and we had again to form line ready to meet them. We, in our usual style, let the infantry get well within our musket shot before the order was given to fire, so that our volley proved to be a fearful success. We did not lose a single inch of ground the whole day, though after these successive charges our numbers were fearfully thinned, and even during the short interval between each charge, the enemy's cannon had been doing some mischief among our ranks besides. The men in their tired state were beginning to despair, but the officers cheered them on continually through the day with the cry of, "Keep your ground, my men." It is a mystery to me how it was accomplished, for at last so few were left that there was scarcely enough to form square. About 4 o'clock, I was ordered to the colours. This, although I was used to warfare as much as any, was a job I did not at all like. There had been before me that day 14 sergeants already killed and wounded while in charge of those colours, with officers in proportion, and the staff and colours were almost cut to pieces. This job will never be blotted from my memory. I remember it as if it had been yesterday. I had not been there more than a quarter of an hour when a cannon shot came and took the captain's head clean off. This was again close to me, for my left side was touching the poor captain's right, and I was spattered all over with his blood.
Well, that's some clip, isn't it? That's some clip. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a bit more. There's a bit more to it if you want to go onto YouTube and look it up. There is a bit more to it than that, but yeah, it just gives you the idea. So, you know, he stood shoulder to shoulder with a guy who's just had his head blown off by a cannonball, for goodness sake. Mm-hmm. And he still held rank, you know? Wow.
I mean, the only good thing about the guy that lost his head is it would have been pretty quick, I suppose, but I wasn't there. You kind of hope that it would be, but there's not, you know, of course, the film doesn't really sort of convey that. It does in parts, but not the sheer horror of it as much as I was expecting, to be quite honest.
I was expecting a lot more horror and a lot less artistry.
Me too.
You know, clever camera shots underwater with the water turning red and cannonballs flying through ice, and you know, as I say, great spectacle, but really didn't really do anything to convey the barbarity of war at that point.
Well, we'll just have to redo it, won't we? But as I said, I think a TV series really would be the thing. You just need so much more time to cover it. I mean, one of the thoughts I had before I saw it as well was I didn't expect it to be as good as Gladiator, for the simple reason that I didn't know the story of Gladiator, neither did anybody else, other than it's focused around a particular storyline, which may or may not be true. I don't really know. It didn't really matter. I thought it illustrated things really well. So as a compact story against a huge background, it worked brilliantly. It's a fantastic film. This is a very good film. It's not as good as Gladiator. It's probably a tedious film for people that can't fill the gaps in, as we were mentioning before. But I think it's just to do with the limitations of time. It just needed an awful lot more minutes. It's pretty obvious that, as I said, there's nothing about Berezina. Borodino is over in a flash, really. It's a huge thing. Waterloo, similarly, you've got to cram too much into these things. It's obviously built for a series. Not that anybody would probably want to do it. I suppose there's maybe not too much demand for it, but it struck me that was the case. Then there's the whole scene with the Code Napoleon, his planting of trees and the laying of roads all over France. This focus of his to actually, protect France for what it was. But I thought, I don't know whether they mentioned it too much. You'll have to tell me. The theme was that, or maybe this is just I'm confusing my reading with the film. Let's just go back to this French Revolution thing. So that revolution really is the New World Order making itself known. That's what I'm going to suggest, right? I think that's what it is. This is that Jesuit Illuminati thing. This is what it is. This is perversion in terms of the Jacobin clubs and all of those things. In general terms, that's what it is. And out of that, they then get the Reign of Terror with Robespierre, which is completely out of hand. You'll all be very pleased that Robespierre got guillotined himself, and he deserved it. There's no two ways about it.
They were just using the guillotine as a means of crushing any type of opposition, no matter what anyone said. And I think that was seized upon by quite a few folks, and eventually, as you say, Robespierre ended up having his own head cut off with the guillotine that he so loved.
Yes, absolutely. And of course it's the same thing. It's echoed then down the line in Russia with the slaughtering of the intelligentsia, the intellectuals as it were, or the intelligent middle classes, for exactly the same reasons. So they're killing I think they guillotined something like 27,000, 40,000 died. This is men, women and children from the aristocracy. That is the skilled, the intelligent managers of their civilization, which when you read about the way that Louis XVI was running it, there weren't any problems until these people turned up and decided to create problems which the king was then going to be blamed for. Nothing new under the sun. Nothing new under the sun with this stuff.
Absolutely.
And then Napoleon comes along, and this is Mike King's take, and I like this take as well. He was fighting both. He was fighting the New World Order in the form of the banking cartel and their emissaries, the Illuminists, and so on and so forth. And he was also fighting the Old World Order, which was really the monarchies that were keen to hang on to power and, of course, were beginning to make a marriage in hell with the banking classes. And I like that. I like it as an idea. Maybe I'm just a sucker for it and it's not true, but I think you see then a parallel with him seeking to defend what they built. And I think the parallel with Hitler is similar. I think it's not exactly the same, but it's similar in that he's seeking to defend this nation that they'd built and its mere existence under the rules, the way that life was being ordered, both in France under Napoleon and Germany under Hitler, was an affront to the old systems or the systems of control that the incumbent power bases throughout Europe had got used to. They didn't want it. I've mentioned before, if you and I were alive in the 1930s and we'd floated over to Berlin or something in 1937 and seen what they were doing, we'd have gone, this is brilliant. We want to bear this. How do you do that?
And so-called, you take it to modern day circumstances, and you could say that Putin is viewed as a thorn in the side of the New World Order. My friend in Canada is vehemently defensive of Putin, and or Putin, however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah.
And he would love to move to a Russian province because he says they're not putting up with any of that New World Order nonsense over there. But I see patterns forming here. I've brought it up before, but there is a huge similarity between the Danzig corridor and the Donbass region with the Ukraine conflict. So it's almost the same playbook being, carried out or played out over and over again throughout history.
Yep, it is. And you were right in saying that if you want to go and see the film and acquire useful history, you're not going to get too much. You need to go in it with the history already with you, and put your judgments aside that you're about to see something that will not be accurate, and enjoy it, if that's the right word, for what it is. I actually found it just absolutely shot by. I couldn't believe that 3 hours had gone by. And, I thought, where's the next 3? That's literally all I can think of. That's way... No. This is too fast, because of all these things that were missed. As you mentioned earlier, the whole of the... apart from, his problem in Moscow, really the start of that was the trouble prior to that in Spain and Portugal. That went bad, and every time he took himself down there, which he did, I know he took himself down there once, all of a sudden the French army began to recover all the ground they'd lost, and it all worked, and then he got called back to Paris to deal with something else. So it's literally, you could say, well, maybe it's the technology of the day. If they'd have had the telegram or something, he could have sorted things out. But you can see and he could have, I suppose. But it wasn't.
A lot of
be.
the accounts that I've read about, the struggles that they had in Spain and everything was basically because Napoleon was issuing orders from France which were gravely outdated to the circumstances that they found themselves in.
Yeah, by the time they arrived.
Yeah, by the time they arrived, because as you say, everything was travelling at the speed of horse. That's it, Yeah,
it really is. It really is. It's it is. I'm trying to think of other bits that I wanted to be in the film that weren't. Hitting the pyramids with cannonballs was silly. That didn't happen. Oh, the other one, we might as well address it here. There is an old myth floating around that, although they didn't put it in the film, thankfully, because it is nonsense, that Napoleon shot the nose off of the Sphinx, which is a bit much. And the way I read it first was, gunnery team, in need of some target practice, decided to just blow the nose off of this artifact. I mean, if they were able to do that, a bloody good gunnery team, if they could do that. I don't know from what distance, but I've had people tell me this. And they said, no, it's... he did all this, so I thought that can't be right. And I went off and did a little bit of research. I found out that there was a Danish surveyor and geologist who had been in that part of the world in the 1600s, like 150 years prior. He'd done a lot of drawings, and there's the drawing of the Sphinx, noseless. There was no nose in 1660 or 70 odd or whenever it was this guy had drawn it. So, and there were excellent drawings. The guy could really draw. So that's also
that's the thing. I mean, like you say, that with the discrepancies with the Egypt thing, they could have done a little bit on the fact that the British fleet had attacked the French fleet in the Nile and been highly successful because the French fleet thought they'd moored themselves close enough to the shoals not to be outflanked, and they hadn't, and the British fleet went in. That was, as I say, that was the reason he left Egypt, because he was threatened by the British. Why couldn't they put that in there? Why could they not put in the fact that the British were a thorn in his side pretty much from day one?
They were. And another aspect is the amount of money Pitt was quite happy to send to Austria and elsewhere to keep agitating against Napoleon. They sent a lot of money. A lot. Yeah. And, interestingly, I don't know quite how it all links together, but it obviously does. This money, because it was about the pounds going all over the place. Of course, the commercial strength of Britain at the time is pretty big in comparison to anybody else because of all these boats we've got. I say we, I wasn't alive, but you get the gist. And so all that money, and of course the income tax arrives. Remember? Not that I was alive at the time, but hey, we need to slap on an income tax to pay for the Napoleonic Wars. And most of that money that was raised in tax was being used as bribes to go to Austria and Russia and this, that, and the other, to do these things. I'm sure, you see, although obviously people look at him and say, you never should have gone into Russia, and of course, in retrospect, it's a bad thing. But from his point of view, Tsar Alexander had broken his word. I don't know how...
Not just that. If they hadn't, because it got to the point with the Russian army, whereby the Tsar said to them, "You're going to have to stand." He wanted them to stand at Moscow. He said, because it's a matter really now of public opinion towards sovereignty.
Yeah.
You know, the people are getting ashamed that the army keeps running away, because
Yes.
the armies did keep running away from Napoleon because he was going to cream them.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And it was, if it wasn't for the fact of the scorched earth policy and the fact that they'd actually evacuated pretty much the whole of Moscow, so that when he got there was nothing to conquer. You know, Moscow, possibly the most sacred city of Russia.
Yeah.
And you know, this is why it got to the point with the Russian monarchy where they were chastising the military high command, saying, "You've got to stand and fight. You've got to do it. This is a matter of our country's honour now."
Yes. Yeah. You can obviously say, you know, I mean, the same tactic. They're the only country, the Russians are the only people that can keep on retreating for an awful long way. Like, do you see?
Absolutely.
And therefore, because it's such a long way, it's not viewed as a retreat or as a backing off. It is viewed rightfully as a tactic of devastating effect. It's, you know, what would we would, if we were Russians, we'd agree with it. We go, no, just keep walking over there, walk over there, walk over there, walk over there, keep walking, don't let him catch us up. Then they'll get exhausted and then we just wipe them out. And I'm afraid that that's what happened, you know.
It's happened twice in 200 years, yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's to do with the great geographical challenge of that place. Of course, I think we can say now that what with missiles and everything, that's all over, you know. So it really, the whole challenge of distance and moving weaponry distance used to have to be moved by foot or horse, then by tank. And one of the interesting... I
was going to say, we're back to the logistics again, aren't we?
We are.
Of moving such a huge body of men. What did you say, 680,000?
Something like that. It's colossal. And you know, very similar to the Waffen SS, they were made up of multiple nationalities. Dutchmen, see, the Dutchmen built the bridge at the Berezina. Dutch sappers went in there, or carpenters, and built this. So there were all these different divisions, just like the Waffen SS, where he'd settled things down. He had to, everybody says, oh, he's attacking everybody and all this, that, and the other. Well, it's basically defense. They were massing against him all the time. He defeated something like 7 alliances. And of course, the last few, it went wrong. You know, it just went badly wrong. I mean, the amazing thing that he could even muster an army for Waterloo, to be quite honest. I mean, they get back in 1812 and lose Paris. The Russians get into Paris, you know. He then has to abdicate, goes to Elba. And he only makes it back to Paris with about 40,000 men out of the entire 650,000. Those 40,000, however, as I understand it, were his guard and his most intelligent officers and formed the basis of being able to restructure an army. But one of the problems they had at Waterloo is that most of the guys that were fighting there were brand new into it to some degree. Yes. Yeah. And therefore they weren't seasoned in the way that they used to be. And you know, we sound as though we're almost defending it. It's not. It's an amazing life of a guy fighting against something on every single front and still creating something amazing. I mean, some of the scenes that I would have liked to have seen was a confrontation with the Sanhedrin. I think this is about 1803 or 4. I've mentioned it here before because, you see, there's basically it kind of de-ghettoized the Jews out of Paris, and this is part of a secondary problem. It almost goes into biblical stuff, which I won't touch on today, but it's to do with the little horns and this, that, and the other. Sort of unleashing of something is part of that. But I know that he called them because he was instrumental in putting the Code Napoleon together, which was a gathering together of all these laws to try and simplify it as a code. Now, I haven't looked into that. There may be some nasty things in there that I don't like and don't agree with. I'm just pointing out that is what he did. The parallel, I suppose, is to some degree, although maybe in essence not, but to some degree similar to what Alfred the Great did with his daughter when they pulled in all the laws of England to effectively form the core of the body of the common law, based on traditions and habits, you know, in the different regions or the different kingdoms of England as they were known back then. Mm-hmm. And he brought them in and he basically said to them, which one? Which law? Which shall it be? A bit like John Wayne. Which shall it be? Is it going to be is it going to be the Talmud, or is it going to be the Code Napoleon? And I don't know what the outcome is. I'm sorry, I'm left on tenterhooks as well. What did they say? They went off. I remember they went. We've got to go away and think about this. I said, okay, but that's about I think that's the early 1800s, 1802, 1803. Maybe he's just been made emperor. So it's round about that period, or he's just made himself emperor. It's not bad making yourself emperor and it working. So it's quite.
Do you know if there's any, just because obviously you're probably a bit more well read on the Napoleonic era than I am, but do you know if there's any truth? Because in the film, he states that he instead of having the crown placed upon his head, he takes the crown himself and announces to the onlooking audience that he found the crown of France in the gutter, and he places it on his own head.
Yeah.
Is there any truth in that little section there?
Well, he did do that. Yeah, I don't know whether he said those exact words, but he absolutely crowned himself. Yep, he did. And he made sure he got in there before the Pope could do it. And he was sending a signal to the Roman Catholic Church, which is, you're not in charge. It was symbolic, and he meant to do it, absolutely. So if he didn't say what the actor said in the film, it's a pity, because it's actually quite a good line.
Yes,
I found the throne of France in the gutter, and I place it atop my own head. They also shot that piece perfectly, because there is a painting of that. I was thinking of even using it tonight, but I thought it's so well known. It's a wonderful painting.
There's actually a scene of the guy hurriedly sketching out that.
That's right.
So the artist is included in the film, isn't he? That was quite a nice little touch. Yeah,
it was. It was very, very good. And you've got to say the sets are amazing. I mean, I don't know where if these buildings still stand. I mean, it's just. And France, the other thing is that France was the most powerful nation in Europe at the time, as powerful on land as we were at sea. But we've been able to say that for a long time. We can't say it now, of course.
Well, ever since the Spanish Armada got crippled, basically. Yeah.
Need to do anything on the Spanish Armada though, because you know of, or you may not know, but Dennis Wise. I
don't know him, but I know of him. Yes, yeah, fantastic.
And if you're listening, Dennis, keep getting well. Dennis has beguiled me with a few sentences about a year ago where he said there's more than one armada. Are you aware of that? I said no. He said, there were several goes. There may have been as many as 3. I'm going, ooh. Now, I don't know even where to begin on that one, but he does. So I'm hoping he gets well, because I'd love to pick his brains and get him on here at some point, and we could go through that, as part of a deep dive of looking at that, because it does tap into possibly magic, or what we think of as magic, the raising up of these storms. There's something, maybe it's all blah blah blah, oh Paul, you've had not enough to drink or too much to drink or something like that, but I think that there's something about it. There is something about it. So yeah, there were more than one. And, in Ireland as well, just a completely disconnected to move off. There's people there called the Black Irish. They're over on the west coast of Ireland. And the reason that they've got very, very dark hair, because they're very almost black. This is because one or more of the armada that was blown off course went up the east coast of England, right around the tip of Scotland, came back down the west coast of Ireland and were shipwrecked there. And that was it. And so they interbred with the Irish people of the town, or wherever it was. This will be in the 1500s. And away it goes, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I've recently, I don't want to get into it too much now, but I've recently been getting into the whole St. Francis Drake thing as well, because as I said to you the other night, my history, I took history as a GCSE, which is a supposed qualification over here in the UK. But my history throughout my schooling started at the Peasants' Revolt, then the Industrial Revolution, and then we missed out a whole load of stuff and went straight on to World War One. And World War II up to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that was the entirety of my national curriculum of historical teachings. So left out were things like St. Francis Drake, Admiral Horatio Nelson, and all these massively, prominently influential figures in British history. Yeah. And instead I had to learn about Hitler and the Diary of Anne Frank and
you lucky lad.
Kind of thing.
You lucky lad. The thing that always strikes me about history, as I remember being taught it, is just how jolly it all was. You never got a sense of all the sheer physical wreckage of these events. Anyway, there's a bloke and he did this and he chopped his head off. Oh, it's all right. You just think nobody goes into what that's actually like.
Actually, I've got one exception to that. My one and only exception to that is I remember watching footage of World War One in a history lesson.
Yes.
And looking towards, and I didn't say anything to anyone else in the class because I thought it would just be mean. But I looked back, and my history teacher, she was sat at the back of the class crying as these guys were falling on footage. These guys were going over the top and instantly just dropping to the ground. And she was sat there were tears rolling down her cheeks. And I look back on that and I think, she had a real understanding of what was going on. Whereas for kids, it's just...
You can't have it, can you? You can't acquire that understanding.
Yeah.
Yay, give me a machine gun. Yeah, let's go kill him and all that kind of stuff. We'll be this guy and you can be that guy and blah, blah, blah. Have you actually seen a body that's been struck by a missile and blown into 1,000 pieces? No, let me show you, son. No, don't do that.
Yeah.
It's worse than you can. You go, oh, I couldn't imagine it was that bad. Yeah, well, it's worse than that. It's that awful, and so
it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And when I think about, quite often, we're hearing a lot nowadays about, people dying young. More and more nowadays, we're hearing, about people dying young for whatever reason. Don't want to sort of go into that now, but I often say. My dad, who's 82, often tells me that it's a race between the cancer and the alcohol, and he hopes that it's the alcohol because it'll be slightly more fun.
What a
he's
chirpy
very honest.
attitude.
He's so honest and
has.
pragmatic.
Yes.
He's pragmatic. He's pragmatic, and he does it with a spring in his step. And I always say to him, you know what? If I got knocked down by a bus tomorrow, I've still had at least twice the life than all these people I read about. These World War One and World War Two guys that went out there and gave their lives for this little island that we've got here, to keep it safe, to keep it ours.
Well, that's what they were told, and I guess to some degree it's true, but I think the main thing was to keep the money in the purses of the bankers. That was the most important thing, wasn't it?
But
we can't have them losing money.
In the eyes of the gentlemen that went out there, and believe me, they were gentlemen.
Yeah.
In the eyes of the intelligentsia, if you want to put it that way, that went out there, and the common man. In fact, I don't know whether you heard me talk about this last night, but I've got a dictionary of phrase and fable here at home,
right? Which
I always leave in the downstairs bathroom for any visitors to keep themselves amused while they might be using it. It's a it's a huge book. It's 1,500 pages. And it's a dictionary of phrases and fables. And one of the phrases it has in there is the man in the street.
Oh, him.
Yes, him. And the definition is thus: the ordinary citizen who, in the aggregate, makes public opinion. So the ordinary citizen who, in the aggregate, makes public opinion. Well, how dare this book take away from the authority of the mainstream media and the government?
Yep. How dare they? How dare he?
How dare they indeed?
Is that the route of the man on the Clapham omnibus? That's the same thing, isn't it? Is that the sort
do you want me to look it up as we're talking?
I'm sure people outside of England couldn't give a whatever about...
Well, I'll look it up after the show then.
Stupid English types. What are they talking about? So there's a place in London called Clapham, isn't there? Or Clam, if you want to be posh. They used to start doing it all posh and pretending to be snobby. Oh, I live in Clam, but it's Clapham. See, Clapham. And it features a lot in lyrics of pop songs, doesn't it? Clapham. It's always popping up. Squeeze. Don't they have I met a girl in Clapham, something like that. Anyway. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah, so the man on the Clapham omnibus is sort of like your average bloke in the street, the man in the street. And it became known, I think, in newspapers, or maybe it's all to do with if it appeals to the man on the Clapham omnibus, him, this metaphorical Englishman who's always on the bus going to work or whatever,
It is in the book. I'm just finding it now. So
very good.
Keep talking.
Well, I will. So anyway, I'm just going to zoom over to Napoleon again, and one of the bits that I would have liked to have seen in the film, but yet again, when you think about it, really needs to go into the TV series, which is sorely needed. The more I keep thinking about it, or would be marvellous, was to do with Haiti. Haiti. I might have mentioned this here before, but now that we're doing the things, we'll cover it a little bit here. Haiti became the second republic in the world after the United States, even before the French Republic had fully formed, I think. And so word of the revolution had got to Haiti after 1776. I don't know quite when. And they went, we'll have a bit of this. So they formed a republic and got on with it. Now, the racial makeup of Haiti at the time was there were several thousand French Europeans there who managed and ran the island and did a pretty good job of it, I believe. Of course, there'll be accounts that tell me how evil they were, but I've heard good things as well as no doubt bad. Then there were the African population, or I suppose maybe they were the descendants of slaves, or maybe they were indigenous people to Haiti, so I'm a little bit ignorant on that. And then there was the race-mixed population. So there were these three groups because there'd been a bit of that going on, a bit too much. Well, when the idea of being in charge made its presence known in Haiti, the blacks of Haiti got involved in a war with everyone. They all got involved in war, and the blacks killed everyone. Everyone. I think about 7 people got back to New Orleans or something. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but it wasn't many. 7 Europeans. They killed everyone, the mulattoes and the white people. And Napoleon had to send boats out there. This is while he's dealing with us lot and everything on the continent. With, I think, about 29,000 troops went out. I don't know how many boatloads that is, but it's quite a few, right? I don't know whether you can get a 1,000 on one boat, but I doubt it. It seems an awful lot.
No,
right?
Certainly not.
Yeah, so it's absolutely bloody boatloads of them. Well, of these 29,000 that went out there, 25,000 died. Not from fighting. They didn't fight at all. They went into the jungle, got jungle fever and died. They didn't have anything to do with them. So that didn't turn out too good. So, and this is whilst all this other stuff's going on. I'll just send 30,000 troops over there on some wooden boats 4,000 miles away. Really? Yeah, we're going to have to sort that out.
Well,
so
I suppose it's no different to Britain policing slavery in its empire while the Napoleonic Wars were going on. At which time we lost 2,000
yeah.
Royal Naval personnel
trying to stop
slavery. Yeah, trying to stop slavery. Nasty old white man.
Yeah, I feel suitably evil today. I don't know about you. I'm feeling really quite nasty. So it's good. If you're white, just bear it in mind that you're a Nazi and you're evil. Okay, don't forget that because our betters have told us this. So we must keep that well in mind. They're so right about everything. And the man on the Clapham omnibus. Oh, he's arrived, has he? Come on, let's hear from him. Yeah,
okay. In legal parlance, the reasonable person. Possibly the phrase was first used by Sir Charles Bowen, QC, later Lord Bowen, who was the junior counsel against the claimant in the Trickborn case 1871 to 74. That doesn't actually mean anything to me, but it simply means in legal parlance the reasonable person. So
now, that's interesting. That case that you just mentioned, spell it out to me.
Tichborne, sorry.
Yeah.
Tichborne.
The Tichborne claimant. Yes?
Yes.
I think, nerdy am I, at the time, this was the longest trial in British legal history.
Right. Okay.
Yep. And because one of the barristers is a guy called Thomas Keneally, whom I know a great deal about. Keneally's an astonishing individual in all sorts of ways. Apparently,
we do go down some tangents, don't we?
Yeah. I can't help it.
I love it.
Brought it up. It's just switched it. All the lights just went on my head. Right. Keneally was of Irish. I think he came from Dublin. Spent nearly all his life here. Was a ferocious litigant, a great verbal performer. Apparently, his theatrics in court, he got out of hand, by the way, I've got to tell you, but it sounds like he got out of hand, was so amazing that it became the hottest ticket in town to turn up and see him do his thing. This went on for 3 years, didn't it? Is that what it is? 71 to 74, right? That's
right, yeah.
Yeah, and massively long, cost bucket loads. The king and the queen went to see him a lot. It was that good. Right, and it was about a claim. Someone said, I'm the person who's due this inheritance, and he said it was, and they all said, no, it isn't, and it just went on and on and on. So, my brain, I'm going to get a new one. Anyway, that went in there, so there you go. But that's interesting that would come from that.
Yes,
so there we
possibly
go.
the phrase was first used by Sir Charles Bowen QC,
Yes.
who was junior counsel against the claimant.
Yes, that would be right. So he would have been against Keneally. That's
Yes,
correct.
so he was saying, well, the reasonable man, i.e. the man on the street, or
Yeah.
trying to allude to the man on the street, but it wasn't. It was the reasonable man. So there you go. The man of Clapham.
The man on the Clapham omnibus. Omnibus is great, isn't it? So, of course,
go.
I don't know whether it means the same. Are you the reasonable man on the Clapham omnibus, Scott?
I would say I'm ominously reasonable, but I wouldn't say I'm the man on the Clapham omnibus.
You're Mr. Scott of the Napoleonic on the Clapham omnibus. That's who you are. That's who you are. You're the highly reasonable.
We'll take
Mr.
that
Scott.
and run with it for this evening.
Yeah, I like that. I'm adding lots and lots of things to your sort of title for this show. It's really rather
I
good.
like it. Accolades.
Like
As long as they're
we've got
they're
20
not
minutes to go.
derogatory.
Yeah, there's going to be all sorts of
Wow.
things thrown in. You don't know what you might be called by the end of it. So,
As long as none of them begin with C, I'm sure.
no, captain, you mean, and things like that. I understand exactly what you're saying. Absolutely. Yes. Hang on just a minute. By the way, I'm just trying to see if I've actually. Oh, I don't know if I have. Have I? I just wanted to say. Oh, I have. Yeah, there we go. If anybody wants to call in, I know people don't, but if you do, you can. Well, actually, I don't know that people don't because sometimes they do. If you're on Rumble, you'll see the telephone numbers to call in. If you want to call in and say, I hate Napoleon, or I think he's lovely, or, when did he die, and all that kind of stuff, or anything about what we've been talking about, because it's been a bit of a free-for-all as we've jumped up and down the timeline here. The numbers are there. If you're in the US and you want to phone in, 605-313-5866. That's 605-313-5866. If you're in the UK, 0330-390-2135. There'll be a quiz and an exam afterwards. When you get through, the code is 5666999. Difficult to say, but easy to see visually if you're looking at Rumble. So head on over there if you want a reminder of it. Now, where were we? Oh, yes, here I am with you, the man on the Clapham omnibus. I quite like that. It might stick, It might stick. You might be done for.
I'm so glad. Do you know what? I'm amazed. You never cease to amaze me because I didn't think I'd come up with a definition about that, and you'd be like, I know all about that subject. You never cease to amaze me.
Well, I amazed myself. I didn't even. I just kicked it all. I've got books by Keneally on my shelf 4 feet from the back of my head. And I wasn't even reading his other books. His other books are absolutely astonishing, but it's for a totally different type of show. He's an amazing character. He's actually buried, I believe, about 10 miles from here. They may have moved him. I once got a photograph. I wanted to go and find it because I've been taken up greatly by some of his other writings in the spiritual realm. He's quite a formidable guy. For example, I'll just mention one thing. You've heard of the Book of Enoch. Now we're spiraling off. We're getting away from Napoleon. You've heard of the Book of Enoch, right? This very old book, right? Most people will have heard it. It's an astonishing, extremely stimulating tale on all sorts of levels. It's more than a tale, but there we go. Well, he did a version of this, the Book of Enoch, which I suppose by today's standards we say was channeled, and he did this in the 1870s whilst he was still being a barrister, right? So he was taking it with a lot of things. Now, the book itself, in the volume that I have, I think it's about 260 pages long, so it's quite long. His introduction, 600 pages. 600-page introduction to a 250-page book. Yeah, the introduction's mind-blowing. You go, I didn't know this information or these things even existed. When you walk into it, you go, what is this? What world have I walked into? Well, it's an astonishing one. And, of course, he had a tremendous control of language. You see, I'm kind of in love with all those Victorian types. I can't help it. I think I've kind of been born out of whack. I would have probably been dead on a battlefield with you, mate. We'd have been, the men on the Clapham omnibus or the men in the Clapham ditch, probably pretty quickly, because I don't come from nobility, and all that kind of stuff. So, but there's something about the rigour and the sort of self-control, or at least my perception of it, that I'm quite attracted to. And I would like to think it's all going to come back, basically. I'm deluded, aren't I? But I'd like to think that might come back.
There's, there's always hope. I think this world that we live in is very much like the pendulum swings in one direction, and as fast as it tries to swing in one direction, weight gathers against it in the other direction. And, as I say, with all this push at the moment, I mean, you have to admit that, and I hate to use the label because it is just a label, but isn't it funny how right-wing everyone is seeming to become in the UK at the moment?
Oh, it's wonderful. Isn't it interesting? It's very, very interesting. Where did I read this the other day? That a right-wing backlash is coming that's going to be immense. But it's not really a right-wing backlash. It's what you said. It's a pendulum. Things have their moment. And we all are really for the middle ground. We don't mind people having a bit of fun, but we don't want you to go too far because now you're causing cultural decay and you're disgusting. So don't do that. Then we get furious. We don't want people the other way. We go, right, you're all going to go out and form an army. We're going to go and kill everyone. No, we don't want that either. We need both. We need military defence. Everybody does. They need that, and we need to be focusing on those things that treat us well. That we know, which is basically to build good families. That's it. That's absolutely it. So you're not the first person that said that to me in the last 3 or 4 days. It's really interesting that this is coming up because one of the things I've said to people, Mallificus, repeatedly for years, and we'll probably carry on saying it, is I ask people, I say, are you against globalism? Yeah. You're against the woke agenda and all the LGBT stuff and all this sort of perversion in culture and everything? Yeah. I said, oh, you're a Nazi then? And they go, no, I'm not. I say, oh, you are? No, I'm not. I said, you're going to be called that. Do you think? I said, yeah, you'll be called it. I said, because you don't go along with their fascist ideology. The left wing is completely fascist. It's totally dictatorial. We have the moral high ground, they say to themselves. We know better for you plebs. We know best. You don't need any free will. In fact, if you start exercising, we're going to kill you. It's that great irony that they don't get. We love everybody. We want you to love everybody. And those of you that won't love everybody, we're going to kill you because you're troublemakers. No, hang on.
Yeah, exactly.
We're saying to you, can't you think about this a little bit? Don't you see that you might be the problem? Oh, no, we couldn't possibly be the problem. Well, lovely. That's where the evil is. It's pure evil. It just is.
It is. As you well know, I went to the sort of anti-migrant marches down here in Cornwall.
Yes.
Cornwall, southwest of the UK. And there was the usual Antifa squad stood on the other side of the road. The Antifa lot were like, way enthusiastic.
Yes.
Hello?
No, we lost you for a bit there. Probably right in the middle of your thunderous sentences. Yeah, that's the first time that's happened actually on this thing. So we lost you for a few seconds. I'm sorry about that.
Literally, so I asked the opposition on the Antifa lot on the other side of the road while there was a lull in proceedings whether they were proud to be communists. At which point I got a resounding "way!" Yes, of course we are.
We're proud to be communists.
Yeah, and I said, you've not got a very good track record, have you? At which point, obviously, it all crescendoed again, and I couldn't really get a word in edgeways again. But just going back to what you said about how, we want everyone to love each other, and if you don't love each other, then we're going to kill you.
Mm-hmm. That's the gist of it.
Again, well, it is. But again, the man on the street, the ordinary citizen who, in the aggregate, makes, or if you want, creates public opinion.
Yes.
Nothing to do with these idiots who consider themselves at the top of the food chain, who pay for people like Antifa to visit my hometown and, counter-protest the fact that we don't want migrants being put up in hotels while our homeless are living on the streets.
It's good this, because you've looped it, well, for me you have, you've looped it right back into the French Revolution and the basis of this nonsense. Obviously, they had the slogan, did they not? Liberty, fraternity, equality. I mean,
of course they did, yeah.
Isn't it lovely? I mean, who could possibly be against liberty and brotherhood and equality? I mean, come on, it's just great, isn't it? But of course, yes.
Can I read the Protocols of Zion number 1?
Man on the Clapham omnibus, read away. Yes.
We were the first to cry amongst the masses of the people the words liberty, equality, and fraternity. Stupid Gentile poll parrots flew down from all sides onto these baits, and with them carried away the well-being of the world.
Yes.
The would-be wise men of the Gentiles were so stupid that they could not see that in nature there is no equality. There cannot be freedom. The meaning, of course, of freedom is understood by socialists and communists as freedom to wreck your own country.
Yes.
So there is no such thing as equality in nature. There is no such thing as liberty in nature. And there certainly is no such thing as fraternity in nature other than your own heritage and your culture with the people that you live with.
Yes.
Your nation,
That's
quote
right.
unquote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is no universal brotherhood because there doesn't need to be one. It's not a problem that there isn't one. It's a problem that people don't actually stick to the brotherhood that they've been issued with, i.e. their kith and kin. That's the only one that counts. Not because I or you or anybody else says so, but because nature shows it to be thus. We see it. We go, but of course these people don't see it. And, I often think of that sort of liberal mindset, a bit like the response you were just talking about in a crowd there, as people that have not thought about anything they've just heard. It just sounded great at the time, and let's go for it. And you're saying, look, you'd just like to stop and have a cup of coffee or tea in our case, sit down. Let's just go over this a little bit because I think we need to just examine it a little bit before you go off and start chopping everybody's heads off with a guillotine. What do you think? Think it might be worth having a look? But of course they're taken with this stuff.
As I say, I think you're being a bit hasty there. Let's get the guillotine out and think about it afterwards.
Yes. And really, seriously,
that's obviously what happened.
Yeah, I'm going to say it again. If you're only catching this for the first time, if you want to read a book that will, I'm reasonably sure anybody with an inquiring mind will be enthralled by it. Nestor Webster's book on the French Revolution is outstandingly good. It's highly readable. It's not difficult to read at all, and it reveals a pattern of behaviour that is chilling. I'm afraid it's a horror story, a real one, a real horror story of people becoming unhinged in the space of like a crowd mob mentality. And the reason why I think it's relevant is that that's what we have seen over the last 2 or 3 years with regards to the crowd being whipped up with regards to government advice to stick a needle up your bum because it's going to stop COVID. The whole thing is exactly the same, not in the sense that we put guillotines up, but you never know. Maybe there are mental guillotines. There are psychological things that are chopping people off. It gets really hairy if you can't. It's this breakdown in communication. It's not like, oh, I'm not talking to them. It's that when the communication or the words are being sent backwards and forwards, there's no comprehension on one or both sides. None.
Absolutely. Yeah,
no comprehension of what's been said.
Not forgetting also that during the time that COVID was being sort of, and all that stuff was being pushed out, there were people in the independent media, whether this comes from some sort of genetic memory or not, or whether it comes from genuine research, please, folks, answers on the back of a postcard, mallificus@outlook.com. It's fine. Just send me a mail if you've got any proof one way or the other. But there were a lot of people talking about FEMA camps with guillotines.
Yeah.
Weren't there?
Yeah, there were.
Absolutely.
And you don't know what, you see, it's all, is psychological terror enough? It seems to be. It may well be.
I think it is.
If you look at the sort of alternative news cycle, and I tend not to do it, because the alternative media is absolutely riddled with state actors, and you have to really work hard to detect them. But the main thing I would suggest you can detect them on is their budget. If they're in a nice studio and everything's going pretty good, you can bet your bottom dollar that it's not a straight situation, because the guys that are doing it are actually, they're in a garret somewhere chewing their fingernails off going, am I going to pay for the milk? I mean, that's kind of my life to some degree. I'm exaggerating a bit, but you know what I mean, right? It's not Alex Jones, everyone. I know you all know that, who's probably listening here. I shouldn't really say that because we've just followed him, and he does get some good stuff out, but this is about segmenting stuff. I think it's definitely about that. You can't just go around and just talk blather all the time, but it's like, how far can we go in communication? Well, that there's the point when you really start to hit that hard truth is the moment when the heat comes on. That's what's not wanted further up the chain. It's just not wanted at all. And Napoleon's life seems to be about that. They had to muster a lot of armies to get this idea that had inspired the French. The other thing I was thinking as well, Mallificus, with regards to the vigour of the French army, I think that's a good word. I'm not saying that they necessarily had more than the other armies, although it seems to be, because bloody hell they were busy fighting everyone, is that maybe, the unleashing of this these restraints which they had perceived, and I don't mean from the king, but really from the terror, the reign of terror under Robespierre and the Directorate. Yeah. This is why it all went bad, and then Napoleon basically did recover France. It'd been thrown into the toilet, and he did recover it in much the same way, of course, that World War I and the Weimar Republic, destroyed Germany, and that group of gentlemen arrived and did a similar thing, but of course in a modern and Germanic way in comparison to Napoleon. It's also very interesting that when, of course... Sorry. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, well, I was about to finish your sentence. It's also very interesting that, certain banks were paying the bill as well. Both with, the overthrow of the Weimar Republic. As there were certain people that... Chief Justice Jackson wanted to be hauled over the coals in the Nuremberg trials, and I believe it was the British Freemasons that got them off the hook.
I say, those chaps, eh?
Yes.
Yeah, Freemasonry. So, I mean, it's a big problem. I was pointing out to someone earlier today in a conversation that, as far as I'm aware, Adolf, Mr. Hitler, is the only person to shut lots of lodges down, like loads. Tons, like everywhere they went, they were shut down.
As I say, I don't want to defend or not defend Mr. Hitler or Mr. Schicklgruber, as the British used to like to call him. But nothing happens without money, and there was a reason that he could afford a big army of brown shirts to police his meetings. Nothing happens without money. Especially war. Especially war.
It's an extremely cash-consuming business. It just chews up resources and needs more replenishment all the time. And of course, it effectively, inexorably, hands over control of the remnant of the nation to that money force, which is, of course, is what happened in the 1800s and in the last century, considerably, which was all by design. Ha 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 ha. Knowing it after the fact, of course, is irritating. Knowing how to recover our situation, of course, is the great challenge going forward. It's a tremendous challenge. I had a conversation earlier today with someone. We were talking about this, and he raised the point. He said to me, if you look, and this is obvious, it'll be obvious to all of you listeners, I'm sure, if you look at the technology that we have available, we should be living an extremely comfortable and wealthy life. Now, not that I'm targeting that necessarily, but it should be completely beyond this nonsense that we're having to endure at the moment. And it's complete. It's a totally artificial situation. The problem for those who are going to do everything in their power, and it's a lot that they've got to retain power, is that they realise that we are sensing that we don't need them at all. They're not needed. I was just about
to say exactly that. You know what the solution is to turn our backs on these people and to think about how we ought to be living. One of the biggest problems we've got is that we keep looking at all the fear porn put in front of us, and to quote Bill Hicks, it's like a man with a sore tooth. It hurts, but he can't leave it alone.
Yep. It's absolutely right. It's very, very true to it, and it develops into a bad habit. I've had people say, "Stop sending me that." They go, "Well, it's all I know how to do to sort of alert you." I said, "I'm fully alerted. I don't need any more stuff." I said, "If you could replay the news from the 1970s, it'd be just the same. Why do we do that? Just get the old news out and play it, because it's all blather. It's distraction. It's taking us away from our constructive powers, which are considerable, and which we've got to sort of reignite and pull back. And we've got some very testing conversations to have. There are people that are having these conversations right now, but they are, by necessity, they're going to be in small groups because these things are frowned upon. Then they're going, "Oh, you're all haters," and all that kind of stuff's going to come up. But that stuff is going to percolate down, because there's nowhere else for the mind to go. Under these, it seems to me, there's nowhere else for people's thinking and logic to go, and they're going to have to re-engage with the fact that they have to be, and we have to come together as a we and be responsible for how our national life is going to turn out. And we've been stripped and robbed of much of the machinery to do that, and we've got to bring it back in. It's that's.
I've got the first step in that journey. And I would doubt whether most people nowadays would want to take it on, but here is my suggestion for the first step, folks. Ditch your mobile phones. Ditch them.
Oh, you're nothing but a troublemaker, you. Ditch the mobile phone? What did he just say? Are you sure you're the man on the Clapham omnibus? What's going on here? Oh, brilliant. Mallificus, I've really enjoyed it. We're just on the wind-out music. It's another minute to go, so we can talk over for a little while. But, a bit like the Napoleon film not being long enough, this conversation's not long enough. We've left so much out as well, even in trying to include more stuff. Absolutely tons that has been left out. So it's an ongoing thing. I'm going to bring the French Revolution theme back into the show more prevalently. I mean, we're in December. We're nearly at the end of the year. So we'll have a few wrap-up conversations. I might have a guest next week, but I've definitely got one in 2 weeks' time. So, but we'll wait until we're a bit nearer to the date for that. That could be quite a bit of fun. Look, great. Thanks for joining me tonight.
It's been my absolute pleasure. My first time on the Paul English Live show. So thank you so much for inviting me on.
It's brilliant. We'll have you back at some
You're
point, Mallificus. You too. Fantastic. That's it for this week, everybody. We'll see you next week. Keep good, and bye for now.